Looks like you really go for good shoes.
Yes, I go where they've got the best brands in the world and where I always find my size.
Some exclusive department store in the city, I bet.
No, Shoe Town.
Shoe Town? But that's where national brands are about 40% off for people who are budget conscious.
Do you know anyone who isn't budget conscious these days?
Take your good taste to Shoe Town and put yourself in our shoes.
This wine always takes me back to the lake and that tiny island we used to sail to for those great picnic lunches with lake country wine. And I'll never forget those parties. Great food and lake country wine. Light, fruity wines that made everything taste better. Guess what I'm thinking about?
The lake. Taylor Lake Country. Wine that tastes as fresh as its name.
Citizen is staying ahead of the time with the first quartz movement to break the...
Citizen watches, available at Zales. At Home with Johnny Mathis, Monday morning at 10.
Good evening. I'm Oprah Winfrey.
And I'm Richard Sher. Tonight, a very difficult and sad subject.
We're talking tonight about murdered children.
To lose a child for any reason is unspeakable.
But when that child is snatched from you in a violent act, how do you go on?
Charlotte Hollinger found the courage to go on after her own daughter was brutally murdered.
And today, her organization helps other parents to survive when this horror strikes.
Join us as we welcome Charlotte Hollinger to this edition of People Are Talking Tonight. Hi, Charlotte. Come up here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, too. We were talking earlier and saying that to lose a child is just an unbearable, horrible experience, but to have a child murdered, there are hardly any words to describe the kind of grief. What happened in your case?
On September 12, 1978, our 19-year-old daughter Lisa was beaten over the head, brutally and repeatedly with a 7-pound sledgehammer. After 13 days in a coma, she died. Had she lived, Lisa, our firstborn of 3 children, would have graduated this past Mother's Day from Miami University as a German major. Instead, she died in Germany, 4,500 miles from home, the innocent victim of a fellow American student whom she had once loved and thought she might marry. It had been more than 6 months since Lisa had broken off with Bill, but he was persistent about wanting to be with her. One evening, he asked her to come over to the home of the German family with whom he was living, and while she was there, he beat her with a sledgehammer. His reasoning, we are led to believe, was, if I can't have her, then nobody can.
How did you find out about this?
The head of the work-study program at the University of Cincinnati came to the house and told me that Lisa had been hurt. I'll never forget her first words. She came to the door and introduced herself, and then I remembered who she was. I had seen her once before, and she said, "I have some bad news for you." And my first comment was, "Lisa's dead." And she said, "Not yet." Those words are seared in my brain.
Not yet.
Not yet. At that point, I wanted nothing but hope that Lisa would survive. And to hear the words, "not yet," was not very comforting.
So what did you do at that moment? I mean, that has got to be a terrible, you say it's still seared in your brain. How do you begin to pull yourself together? I mean, did you go to Germany or?
Yes, what we did was immediately get in touch with the doctors over there. Lisa was operated on. She survived 13 days in a coma, but we did not know whether she would even survive the brain surgery. My husband took the first flight over. I had 2 other children to think about. I did not go with him immediately. He called from New York to see whether she had survived the surgery. He didn't know whether she would still be alive. She was alive. He got over there. So after a few days, I joined him over there.
How can you keep your senses and not just go completely bananas when you find out
something happens to you? You go into shock. I call it nature's anesthesia. For the first days or maybe even weeks, it's almost as if it's happening to someone else. Your body is protected somehow from feeling everything. It's later on when you begin to feel it, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But in the first stages, you're just numb from the shock of it all.
So what you're telling us, there are certain stages, certain things that happened to a parent of a murdered child. What are the different
First
stages?
is shock.
First is shock. And just as you've heard about the 5 stages that a person goes through in accepting death and so on, I guess in a way you can say they're stages, but it certainly should be made clear that this is not some pattern and you can say I'm going from this to this and you should be at this point. It's not like that. Everybody's reaction is individual. Every person is individual. But I'd say in general, most people do react first of all with shock. And sometimes they're not out of the shock until maybe several weeks after the funeral. And friends and neighbors and family look at that person and they say, my, she's strong. She's doing so well. I can remember people who said to me a week after it, well, I can see you've accepted this. And I thought, my goodness. At that point, I didn't even know that I hadn't accepted it. But wait another month, wait 2 months, wait 3 months. Somebody asked me at 4 months, have you accepted it? I would have been very, very angry.
Your husband is a minister?
Yes, he is.
How did you reckon this with the Lord, this happening? This, a lot of people, you hear the expression, well, it must have been God's will. Could you accept that?
You have asked me about 2 questions there that I'd like to spend 2 days answering, but I won't do that. Let me just say, first of all, that a lot of people thought that since my husband was a minister, his faith would automatically get him through. And he's had to explain to many people he did not experience Lisa's death as a professional clergyman. He experienced Lisa's death as Lisa's father, just like anybody else. And the people who put him on the pedestal and who said, it's the Lord's will, you have to be strong, that was the most harmful thing they could have done.
I would imagine you go through a phase of why me, Lord, why, where you resent the fact that God is doing this to you, or do you not?
I would say that if a person does not go through some stage of resentment and anger and bitterness and hostility and not wanting to go on with his life, he's probably not being completely honest. We all go through it. I don't see how you can avoid it. How can your world be shattered by having your daughter, your son, your own flesh and blood ripped away from you needlessly, senselessly, and you not be angry at somebody?
Was it immediately that you found out? When did you find out that it was senseless, needless? I mean, you first were just told that she had been hurt and that the chances are that she would not live. When did you find out how brutally she had died?
Well, first of all, let me say I think any murder is senseless and needless. I don't care how it's performed. We found out right away what had happened, that Bill had hit her. But then it wasn't until later on as we began to probe that we found out the details.
And that has got to be...
That hurts. There were many, many, many hours and days when I asked myself all these questions. How much did Lisa suffer? Did she see this person whom she had loved and trusted coming at her with a sledgehammer? These thoughts are inescapable.
You must wake up in the night wondering, do you sleep well after that? Do you ever get to sleep?
For the first few months, sleep patterns are so disturbed that fatigue sets in. Well, fatigue is part of the grieving process, too. I think there's a lot about the grieving process people aren't aware of. It takes every bit of your energy just to get up in the morning. I can remember many days I'd lie there, I'd wake up first thing in the morning. Maybe I'd had a dream about Lisa the night before, and I'd wake up and I think, she is alive. It was in the dream that she was killed, and then within a few seconds you realize the nightmare is reality, and it takes every bit of willpower and determination to put one foot on the floor and say, I will get through this day. I will survive. There are people who need me. I will make it. But a lot of times I said that. I was trying hard to convince myself, and I didn't really feel it.
What did you decide to do?
I decided to reach out to other parents of murdered children.
How long did it take you to get to that point, though, Charlotte?
Well, I started out not with any altruistic motives of helping other people. I really started out to help myself. When this happened to me, I thought, what do I do now? Am I going crazy? Am I going to live through this? Does everybody feel this much anger, this much guilt, this much... Whatever it was I was feeling, I couldn't sort it out. And I thought, I have to talk to somebody else who's been through this. But I didn't know another parent of a murdered child. And so I made a lot of phone calls to crisis hotlines and so on, and I asked, is there anybody I can talk to? Finally, I got in touch with a Catholic priest who happened to be working with 2 sets of parents of murdered children. He gave me their names and phone numbers, and I called them, and I said, will you come over to my house and meet with me? This was 3 months after Lisa's death, and we found there was an instant bonding between us. We shared an experience that had changed our lives. Our friends hadn't had it. Our relatives hadn't had it. They said, I can't imagine what you're going through. But these parents didn't have to imagine. They knew.
You say that you're never again the same. How does it change you? Does it make you angry all the time? Do you ever get over that anger and that sense of guilt, bitterness?
I would really like to say this, that your life is going to change, but don't be afraid of experiencing the emotions you're feeling. Don't try to push them down. Don't say to yourself, I'm not angry. Don't say to yourself, I don't want to get stuck in this anger. You can go through your emotions and work your way through them. But if you try to circumvent them and go around them, you are just delaying your healing process. A lot of people don't want to do this because it hurts so much. And people say, don't think about it, keep busy, distract yourself. For me, this was not the way. And I have to say that we're each different people, and everybody will cope with their grief in a different way. But for me, I had to go right through those feelings and feel the anger, lots of tears, lots of anger, lots of screaming, lots of ranting and raving, lots of feeling depressed, lots of all of that. But I'd just like to say to any parents, don't worry. If you're feeling this way, if it's 7 months, 8 months, a year, and you're still feeling some of this, you're not abnormal. You can get through it. You won't get stuck there.
How did your husband get through this?
My husband and I handle...
Individually and with you.
Okay. We handle our feelings differently. I'm a lot angrier person than my husband is. And I've always shown my anger more than he has. So he kept a lot more inside. And do you know what happens to anger that you keep inside of you? It comes out as depression. And so people are very, very depressed. And I try to work with these people, talk to them and so on, and say, let them know it's all right to be angry. Depression is anger turned inward. You don't have any reason to be angry with yourself.
How did
you
your
do
husband
have reason to
express
be
this
angry.
depression?
He overate. He looked depressed. He went to bed and slept a lot. A lot of depressed people sleep and eat and can't work and keep it inside. I shoved things on the floor. I threw things against the wall. I told God what I thought of him, and I think he's still there in spite of it.
What did it do to your relationship with your husband?
There were some hard times. There was one point at which I went back to this priest who had originally given me the names of the murdered children. I said, there's something wrong with my husband over here. He's abnormal. He's not feeling this anger. And
were you angry at your husband for not feeling anger?
I was angry at my husband for not being angrier.
Because you didn't know at the time that his way of expressing it, he held his anger inside, and it came out as depression. You weren't aware of that at the time.
Well, I guess I was in a way, and yet I wanted us to be together in this, if we possibly could. There's so much alienation and separation from everybody anyway. You want to feel there's at least one person who understands what you're feeling.
You're talking about anger. Is it anger directed toward Bill, too, this person who did this to your daughter and his family and his punishment? Do you want to see him murdered?
In answer to the last part of your question first, no, I don't. But the anger has many targets. And in our case, we knew this young man, so that complicated the feelings somewhat. If it's someone you've never met, I think it's easier to have a very clear-cut case of anger at this unknown person who did this thing.
Did you like him?
We had liked him, yes. This complicated the feelings very, very much. So there had been previous feelings of affection toward this young man. He had spent many weekends at our home. When Lisa broke off the relationship with Bill, it was at our house. I spent 3 hours fixing him breakfast. He cried on my shoulder. The last time I saw him was when he hugged me and cried on my shoulder, and spent 3 hours down in my husband's study counseling and talking with him. That was the last time I saw Bill.
And you have not spoken to him? He has not said a word, contacted you since?
No, that's not true. My husband went to see him in jail the very day we learned Lisa died. I was not able to do this. He has been in contact with the father. I've had some slight contact. It's difficult.
What did your husband say to him?
I didn't ask him.
We have some people that are reaching out to talk to you. Hello, you're on People Are Talking.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to share this with the audience and your guest. I think that she's very brave to come on the air and talk about it. I lost a brother who was very, very close to me about 2.5 years ago. I have accepted the death, but because of that closeness and because of all the love that I felt for him as well as my family, I've not been able to forget it. I still wake up every morning and I think about it. And something that has happened recently, I was driving, and just the recent incident, of the president shooting brought back memories of that. I am, at this point, very much opposed to violence. And my brother was very young, about 25 years old. And he was a very good young man and had an awful lot to give. And I thought, my God, how many other families are out here that have faced this type of tragedy that no one has come forward to say, I understand, you are not alone, and there are people that have experienced such an experience. I thank your guest for coming on this morning because I'm a little nervous. I'm not terribly upset at this